Beautiful Things podcast. I'm your host, Connie, and I am so glad you're here. The Weed, Seeds, and Beautiful Things podcast exists to come alongside you and spur you on towards irrepressible growth. As an authority on adversity and resiliency, I love to help others gain the necessary tools to practice the disciplines of resiliency within the spectrum of everyday adversity, and to connect with people through my watercolor and digital art, which you can find on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Weed, Seeds, and Beautiful Things. Also on my website at www.weedseedsbeautifulthings.com. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines resiliency as an ability to recover from or adjust easily to adversity. Potential is having the capacity to become or develop into something new. I believe firmly that every person has potential in varying degrees. With the right support and environment, anyone can learn the lasting habits of becoming a truly resilient person. Join me in this episode of the Weed, Seeds, and Beautiful Things podcast. Welcome to the Weed, Seeds, and Beautiful Things podcast. I'm your host, Connie, and I am truly glad that you're here. The Weed, Seeds, and Beautiful Things podcast is a podcast that is not about gardening or growing marijuana, but is about how to overcome adversity by the habit and disciplines of resiliency. Not by my choice, but by the Lord's great and infinite plan, I have been made an authority on adversity. And although it's a difficult subject to talk about, I feel that it's one that the Lord is equipping me more and more and filling me with His grace to be able to help others overcome their adversity. And how do we do this? Well, we do this by learning the habits and the disciplines of resiliency. It's not easy, but with the Lord, it is most definitely possible. Today, I want to talk with you about this topic that came to my mind as I was praying about what subject I should next address on my show. And as I was praying, I always get a sense of anxiety to produce good content, and I'm struck with anxieties over the past, of things that I feel are perceived weaknesses of mine, things that would limit me from being able to produce good content, or just shame. I mean, shame is really an icky thing that so many of us very frequently deal with. And so in the process of praying over those things, rejecting the lies of the enemy and claiming God's truth, I felt that He gave me very, very clear direction. And that direction was a podcast talking about the topic of planting seeds in the desert. And if you think about it, you don't really go, oh, I'm going to go plant a garden in a desert. Or I'm going to go and take my watering can and produce beautiful flowers out in the middle of the desert. It's just sort of dumb. It's not really that smart. You know, and I'm not even talking about United States deserts like Arizona or whatever. I'm talking about the biblical picture of a biblical desert. Dry, no water, no growth, nothing is able to be sustained in the desert humanly because it's just a barren wasteland. And I started thinking about my life, and I started thinking about the path that the Lord has asked me and laid out for me. And it's been hard. There really is not an adequate few sentences that I could use to sum up the difficulty of the last 40 years of my life. But just for the sake of some perspective, it's been super, super hard. And I think that my life really is a very good picture. If you were to think of the desert, and maybe you can identify with this, you feel like everything has been hard. All of the odds have been stacked against you. Nothing has gone as planned. You've had very small periods of peace or windows where opportunity was allowed to open up for you. Relationships were successful. Dreams were fruitful. And an overarching theme of your life is the desert. And if you're like me, that very often can be discouraging and downright depressing. It takes a lot to entrust your desert season, or maybe your desert life, into the hands of God. The more that I thought about it and the more that I prayed about it, the Lord brought this imagery to my mind that my life has been like a desert. And humanly speaking, deserts are places of death. They're places where things don't grow, things don't survive. And if you were to put a healthy plant out in the desert, humanly speaking, it wouldn't make it. It probably would be dead within a few minutes or maybe hours. I don't know, but it wouldn't last long. And if you put that principle in the context of dreams, or you put that in the context of a heart, you put your heart out there in the desert, it's going to shrivel up and die. And that picture really fits the imagery of my life. And maybe you identify with that on some level. I've been planting seeds in the desert for 40 years. Because by the great grace of God, even all of the times that I've wanted to quit, all of the times that I have tried to quit by means of rebellion in my younger years or suicide attempts in, my latter years, every time that I've tried to quit, the Lord, in his great grace and his great mercy, and for the reasons I don't fully understand, he saved my life. He didn't let me quit. And after a while of being down and out and often feeling sorry for myself and going through all of those different grieving emotions, anger, bartering, whatever it may be, I would pick myself back up again, dust myself off, and go again. And I've been doing this kind of cycle of struggling with God, struggling against God, falling down, getting back up, struggling with God, struggling against God, falling down and getting back up for the last 40 years. It looks different every time, but his great grace and mercy is the only thing that's kept me going. I've been planting seeds in the desert. Humanly speaking, that's dumb. It makes no logical sense. I wasn't even aware of it. But I wanted to read you some scriptures that tell you what God does in the desert, to tell you what God does with a desert. And that if you yourself are living in a desert, if you feel like your life is just one big compilation of dead things, dry things, broken things, brittle things, things that can't seem to ever find a life source, I want to introduce you to my God. And if you know my God, but yet you feel like he's passed you over, or sure, that's for everybody else, but not me, I hope to encourage you that you too, like me, can plant seeds in the desert. The desert is a lonely place. It's a place that has a scary sense of solitude. The desert, if anything does survive, it is something that is hardy and knows how to fight for itself and protect itself. Because things don't come easy in the desert. But that doesn't mean that the desert is a purposeless, void, useless valley of death. Our God, the God that went to the cross and died and rose again and took the keys and the power from death and from hell and from Satan himself, has all authority. And if you, like me, are in a desert or have been in a desert, or maybe are just entering into a desert, you can absolutely have absolute assurance that God has a purpose and a plan for you, and that he wants you to plant your seeds in the desert. He wants you to do it even though it makes no sense. He wants you to do it even if all of your peers and your family and your friends say that it's pointless and you should just give up. He wants you to plant your seeds in the desert if everyone is telling you to curse God and die. Because the truth is, the desert was created by God, And if you are in a desert, you're being allowed to be there by God, not because he's mean and vindictive, but because he has something there for you, and he intends to allow the seeds that you plant in the desert to grow. I want to take us first to Isaiah 35, verses 1 through 4a. It says, "The wilderness and the desert will be glad, and the Arabah will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will blossom profusely and rejoice with rejoicing and shout of joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Encourage the exhausted and strengthen the feeble. Say to those with anxious heart, take courage and fear not." Humanly speaking, none of this can happen in a desert. But with our God, all things are possible. Planting seeds in a desert means it's going to take time. It means that the source of your substance is not going to come from natural and obvious sources. If you are living your life in a desert, you're going to be pushed to the limit. You're going to be brought to the end of yourself. You're going to have to look for hope in God in abnormal places. Things that survive in the desert, they know how to come at it from a different angle, if you will. They know how to save and store up the plants that survive their water within themselves. They know how to go for long periods of time without shade and rain and comfort. And they know to do this because that is how God created them to survive. And if you think about it, God puts cactuses and other terrifying looking creatures, scorpions or whatnot, in the desert. He puts them there. They were created to be there. They have the necessary tools within their created bodies or their plant bodies, or however you want to look at that. They have been created with the necessary tools to survive and thrive in the desert. So you can know then, if God created you and he has allowed you to be living in a desert, it's because he has put within you the tools and the resources, not only to survive, but to thrive. And I will go even a step further and to say he's put you there in the desert because he has seeds he wants you to plant. He has seeds that he supernaturally wants to develop in the desert that could not grow successfully if you were living in your fulfilled dream or in whatever idea you have in your head of where you should be and how things should be going. I say that, and I just feel such a sense of passion inside of myself. I know that I'm right. This life is so hard. You know, I think about believers and non-believers alike, and there is one thread that connects all of humanity together, regardless of what faith or no faith or lack of faith or what God you believe in, and that is this spectrum of adversity. Life is hard, and it is hard for everybody. It is even hard for the believer that is following closely after God. And if we are not careful, we will become discouraged. We need to remember that wherever we are and whatever we are doing, no matter how difficult it may seem and how far away God may appear to be, that just like the little cactus in the desert, that it has everything it needs within itself to hold on to water and nutrients so that it can stay alive. It has the prickly quills on the outside of it to protect it from animals that would eat it. Its root system is deep. It knows how to survive because God made it able to survive. And wherever we are at, we can know that God has provided us with everything we need to plant our seeds in the desert, to survive in the desert, to thrive in the desert, but to come to know Him in the desert. Get out of your mind that things have to look a certain way or they're not going to work. When your Father is the King of the universe, He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He can say to the wilderness, be glad. He can say, blossom and blossom profusely. That's not just one or two flowers. That is thick from stem to stern with glorious flowers in the desert. God doesn't waste desert seasons. And desert seasons are not often logical and easy and fit together in a neat little form and make a pretty little picture. It's often nuggets over here and seasons of dryness and another nugget. And the Lord says to encourage the exhausted, because in the desert you get exhausted, you get parched, you get tired, you get weary, you want to give up. The Lord says to tell those with an anxious heart to take courage and fear not. Plant your seeds in the desert. Do it even though it doesn't make sense. Maybe even not to you. Maybe it doesn't make sense to your friends, but it also doesn't make sense to you. Why am I doing this? Why am I even trying? Why am I even hoping? Why am I even believing? Because you serve God, because you believe in God. And if you don't know Him, you really are missing out. Not loving God and not following God doesn't make life easier. And being angry at God because you're in a desert, it doesn't change anything. And the thing is, friend, is that you're not in a desert simply because you've done something wrong. A lot of the times, we're not in the desert because we did anything wrong at all. We're in the desert because God has something so very special, something that can't be learned any other way, seeds that can't be planted and developed in normal, fertile soil. Sometimes we need the death of the desert to see the wonder of our God. I hope that this encourages you, and I hope that you will persevere and plant your seeds in the desert. Thank you so much for listening to the Weed Seeds and Beautiful Things podcast. I hope that you'll share it with your family and friends. Drop a comment, share the episode on your social media channels, and be sure to follow me at Weed Seeds and Beautiful Things. You can also check out my art on my website, www.weedseedsbeautifulthings.com. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.